Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to commence by thanking Ambassador Munir for her outstanding leadership of the Council during these extraordinary times. Despite difficulties, the ECOSOC under Ambassador Jules' leadership has made significant progress and marked important achievements. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to have the opportunity to preside over the Economic and Social Council for a second time. Pakistan is assuming the presidency of the ECOSOC for the sixth time. The ECOSOC's central mandate is to promote, and I quote, better standards of life in larger freedoms. Never before has the fulfillment of this mandate been more challenging or more imperative as it is today. The COVID-19 pandemic has engulfed the world even as global economic growth was slowing. It is both a health and an economic crisis. It has killed thousands and infected millions in every corner of the world. It has triggered the greatest recessions since the 1930s. As usual, the poorest and most vulnerable countries and groups will suffer the most. The COVID-19 crisis has thrown into bold relief the inherent inequalities embedded in the global financial and economic system. It has illustrated brutally the essential unity of humanity. It has evoked unusual expressions of solidarity and support among and within states. But it has also witnessed some shameful demonstrations of national and subnational selfishness, of a debilitating blame game, of discrimination against and victimization of the poor, the vulnerable, women, children, and minorities. We must all hope that a COVID-19 vaccine will be developed soon. Everyone, everywhere, rich or poor, must have equal access to the vaccine. Excellencies, dear colleagues, today, member states face three simultaneous global challenges: the COVID pandemic and its consequences, the realization of the Agenda for 2030 and the SDGs, and the existential threat of climate catastrophe. It is now obvious that the COVID crisis and recession will make the realization of the SDGs even more challenging. Over 100 million people in the developing countries are likely to be pushed back into extreme poverty. Meanwhile, global warming is accelerating, generating ever more frequent extreme climate events. Unless we implement the agreed goals of the Paris agreements, we face the real prospect of making our planet uninhabitable for humanity and for all living things. The broad policy decisions to address each of these three simultaneous challenges have been taken. Commitments have been made. What is needed now is implementation. This should be the focus of our deliberations. And since we need to respond simultaneously, there must be synergy between our responses to the health, development, and climate challenges. As the Secretary General of the United Nations stated on 18 July in his Nelson Mandela lecture, I quote, "Inequality defines our times," unquote. 26 people own half the world's wealth. Inequality is growing within and among nations. The legacy of colonialism, racism, and foreign occupation is a major systemic cause of inequality. I will propose to the Council that we convene a special meeting in 2021, the 20th anniversary of the Durban Conference Against Racism, to address the root causes of global inequality. Similarly, the 10th ECOSOC Youth Forum should be dedicated to promoting a vision of a more equal, peaceful, united, and dynamic world order. The endeavor to end inequality must infuse our every process. Yet, equality is not equal for unequals. Inequality can be ended only by affirmative action. This implies the consistent application of the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and treatment, not only in combating climate change, but also in advancing the SDGs and in restructuring the international financial and trade architecture and the system of global governance. It also implies special attention to disadvantaged countries, the least developed, the landlocked countries, and the small island developing countries, and to disadvantaged and vulnerable groups within countries, women and children, the poor and destitute, the displaced minorities and refugees. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the ECOSOC has a unique mandate to convene special meetings on urgent and emerging issues. I believe that in the coming year, we should promote specific actions on 3 areas. 1, financing of the COVID-19 SDG and climate goals. 2, sustainable infrastructure development. And 3, application of advanced science and technology for sustained, efficient, and sustainable growth. Financing is the key to recovery from the current crisis and to restore the world on the path to the SDGs. Several actions have been taken to generate financing to respond to the COVID-19 crisis, but much more is needed. The IMF Managing Director has estimated that the developing countries will need over $2.5 trillion in financing to recover from the impact of the pandemic and to regain the path towards the SDGs. As early as last April, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, launched a global initiative on debt relief. The United Nations Secretary General, Canada, and Jamaica have launched a process to generate the required financing. There are a number of proposals on the table: the Group of 20's debt suspension initiative, private sector participation, the reallocation and creation of special drawing rights, rationalization of the tax system, and arresting illicit financing flows, on which the FACTI panel will submit its recommendations during this year. The ECOSOC should help to build a coordinated approach to ensure the required capital flows to developing countries to recover from the current recession and to revive the prospects of achieving the SDGs and addressing the environmental goals. In preparation for the annual Forum on Financing for Development next April, I intend to convene a few informal meetings and consultations to advance these objectives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Addis Ababa Action Plan indicates that investing in sustainable and resilient infrastructure, energy, transportation, water, and sanitation is a prerequisite to achieving most of the development goals. There is no single type of investment that is more essential for the achievement of the SDGs than infrastructure. An additional annual investment of $1.5 trillion is needed in the developing countries to achieve these objectives. Considerable work has been initiated in public and private settings to promote renewable energy investments in developing countries. Similar focused consideration is needed in transportation, housing, water, and sanitation. A lack of capacity to prepare feasible and bankable infrastructure projects and to execute and administer them is a major impediment to infrastructure development in the developing countries. To this end, consideration should be given to the creation of an infrastructure project preparation and investment center under the umbrella of the United Nations. The Infrastructure Center could incorporate a compendium of pre-screened and viable bankable infrastructure projects for developing countries, a database on private and public companies which can execute such projects, a compendium of investors with interest and experience in investing in infrastructure, and a fintech mechanism to bring them all together. If we are to build back better, Excellencies, the application and absorption of new technologies in the developing countries is indispensable, indeed imperative. This will be possible only if access to advanced technologies is available to developing countries on a preferential basis. To this end, the intellectual property regime should be made compatible with the SDGs. The UN's technology mechanisms can be utilized to promote practical applications of science and technology for SDG implementation. Excellencies, as the scramble for a vaccine and treatment for COVID-19 has illustrated, if there is sufficiently strong desire to achieve a specific scientific outcome, the resources required can be readily mobilized. Excellencies, the digital revolution has opened vast opportunities for developing countries and for all countries. Indeed, with proper planning, developing countries can aspire not so much to catch up with the current development models of the advanced countries, but to leapfrog into new and modern development paradigms utilizing digital and other cutting-edge technologies. Yet, this endeavor will be stillborn if the yawning gap between the underconnected and the hyper-digitalized countries is not bridged. If the conditions and terms in the digital space continue to be set by a handful of internet giants, and if instead of closing the north-south gap, we create a west-east digital divide. Excellencies, as usual this year, ECOSOC has a long agenda. I will rely greatly on the skill and expertise of the distinguished vice presidents to enable the Council to adequately consider all issues on our extensive agenda. I also intend to work closely with the President of the General Assembly for the 75th session, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkir, in areas where ECOSOC and the General Assembly exercise joint and common responsibilities. My predecessor has set a great example in this context. Most of the issues on the Council's agenda are well known. It would be more efficient, therefore, if the interventions and proposals from members were focused on the important, the new, or outstanding issues without recalling known history. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan will conduct the ECOSOC's proceedings with objectivity and impartiality, but not without ambition. The ambition, especially, to promote the vital objectives of recovering from the COVID-19 crisis, achieving the SDGs during the decade of action, and implementing the Paris Agreements on climate change. I thank you for your attention.